Hey everybody, today I'm talking about Faiyum, which is a 1 to 5 player board game designed by Friedmann Friese. This one takes about 2 hours to play and it came out in 2020. As you can probably tell by the box art here, this game is set in ancient Egypt and plays out over this map here. Now the idea is essentially, and to dumb it down a lot, is that you're going to be gathering different resources and developing the land to build towns and settlements, roads, etc. Like you can see here. Now I will say the board isn't going to look like this at the start of the game. This is what the board's going to look like at the end of the game, particularly a 2-player game here. So at the start of the game, it is going to look a bit more like this section of the map here, where you have all these different alligators on these different hexes, except for the stone kind of hexes. They're not going to have anything on them. And what you're going to do in the game is you're going to take one of 3 pretty simple actions, except the fallout of those 3 actions isn't going to be as simple as it might first appear. So everybody's going to start with a set of cards like this, these starting cards, and you are either going to play a card, you are either going to pay money to take a new card from this card market here, which, if you're familiar with Power Grid, which is one of Friedmann Friese's most famous games, it might look somewhat familiar to that, where you have this current market here, represented by these 4 cards with different prices. So the cheaper the cards are on the left here, and as more cards come out, the lower ones come to, or shuffle down to the cheaper slots. And you've also got this upcoming market here, where in this particular example, these aren't going to be available until right at the very end. Most of the cards are going to look a bit more like this. And as you can see from the cards here, not only have you got the description of what the card is, you've got the iconography of what the card represents, and the cost and effect of what you get from playing these cards. You've also got a number in the top right-hand symbol of every card. And that's because every single card in this deck, and I've already gone through the whole deck here because, as I said, this is at the end of the game, is going to be unique, all with different ability, and generally going from the lower cards aren't quite as powerful as the higher cards, or at least the lower cards are generally more beneficial at the beginning of the game. So let's take a basic look at what some of these cards are going to do. So from the starting cards here, let's say you've got some farmers here, which basically you're going to place one of these people onto the board and take the depicted resource. So, for example, if I went here, I would take one of these wheat tokens. If I choose to do that on a spot with an alligator on, say like this, then not only would I get that resource, I'll take the alligator off the board and also get a little bit of money as well. And from then on, whenever you place a farmer, you're going to have to place it in a spot that's adjacent to it, so you can't just spawn out of nowhere. So that's going to be one of the very basic actions. Additionally, you can build settlements here by spending one of each of the resources, giving you victory points and money. And settlements are important because they kind of give you new spawning points to do things, and so on. And you've also got the roads cards as well, which lets you build these roads here, which again can expand into new land and give you the opportunity to build new buildings, etc., such as these little plantations all over the board here, which you see. And naturally, the second objective is the second action you can take is to buy a card here based on these costs, and then you're going to add those to your hand. And something I should mention is one of the unique twists on the game is that when you play one of these cards, you are going to put it face up on your discard pile, and from every card from then on, you're going to have to keep playing on top of that discard pile until the point where you want to take the third action, which is this administration action, where you're going to take money. For example, here you get 3 money. Take away or minus 1 money for each card left in your hand. So you're incentivized to play through all the cards that you've accumulated to get a bit more money. And following that, you can choose to pick up a couple of workers from the board or farmers from the board and get an additional money for each of those. And then from there, you get to take the top 3 cards from your discard pile for free back into your hand to use. And from every card after that, you're going to have to pay an additional coin or additional whatever the currency is here to take that card into your hand too. And as you can probably imagine, as you accumulate more and more cards, like we've done here with all this whole big deck of cards, playing things in a certain order is going to be more and more important, because to dig deeper into that pile, you're going to have to pay more and more. And once you've done that, you are going to replenish the market here by getting rid of the 2 lowest cards, and drawing new cards and rearranging them back into numerical order, and then going again for the next turn. So fundamentally, one of those 3 very simple actions is that play a card and discard in the order that you've played them. You can buy a card, or you can do the administration action where you're essentially picking your cards back up. Now, I will say this is a game that's very hard to break down in terms of the strategy and the routes you can take, because all of the gameplay takes place on these cards. So as you can see, you can get points by building these towns on top of these settlements. You're going to get points by building settlements. You're going to get points by building roads. As you buy more cards, you can start to gather resources quicker by getting more advanced farmers, adding to these building sites here, and so on. And again, there's lots of different synergizing cards which work well together to let you do lots of different things to get points and money. And it's one of those games where you can't really learn the rules overhead without playing through the game first. So I think if you've got the general gist of that, then you can understand how the game's going to work. And I think leaving the cards to explore for yourself is going to be a lot more beneficial than to actually talk through each single card. So I'll just have a quick run through here about what some of them do. So for example here, if you place a worker on a settlement, you're going to get 3 grapes. Or this one here, where you place a worker next to the water, then you're going to get some fish, or all these different things you can get here to get resources quicker, more efficiently, and basically build things. So yeah, it's one of those games where you're going to have to try it for yourself. So that's pretty much how the game's going to play mechanically. Very simple, extremely streamlined, but it's certainly got some layers that aren't quite apparent to start with. So let's talk about how the game actually plays out and how I feel about it. So first off, in terms of the actual mechanisms here, this idea of the almost deck building and managing your hand is so core and fundamental to the gameplay, which I can't even stress without playing it yourself, because as I said, you only get to pick up the top 3 of your discard pile, which can be an extremely important decision, because as you acquire more and more of these powerful cards, of course you want to play them, but in order to play them, you're going to have to keep on taking administration actions to pick them back up. So the order in which you play them is important, because you want to bury the cards that you aren't so fussed about using again. And on top of that, there are lots of different cards that let you manipulate your deck by putting things on the bottom of the deck, or picking things back up, or even getting rid of things from your deck completely. So that's really important about the way you play things, and I absolutely love that key mechanism, and it certainly just adds so much interest and a lot more weight to just playing these cards. And you just can't pick up cards and play them in any order, because that is really going to bite you in the ass if you keep doing that. So I really do like that. On top of that, the card row itself is extremely interesting, because it's mostly randomized, meaning that the order which they come out in adds so much variety and flavor to the game. Because sometimes the cards that you might not be so important at the beginning of the game will come out really early. So you need to decide, am I going to invest in that now while it's really cheap and hope it will play out for me later? But bearing in mind that that's going to clog up my hand, and in order to get it out later, I'm probably going to have to dig quite deep into my discard pile to get it back. So again, lots of really interesting little decisions here that are so mechanically simple, but do have a lot of weighting to them. So in terms of the mechanisms and meaningful decisions, that's really important. On top of that as well, a lot of the actions you take leave opportunities for your opponent. So for example, a lot of these buildings you can't actually build until the land is developed. And what that means is that the crocodile has to be gone from the spot, and some road has to be built into that region. So for example, this one here. So if I was to spend my valuable resources in order to build the roads into these spots here, then it's going to leave a very open opportunity for my opponent to jump in there before I do, because as I said, you only take one of those 3 actions and it's going to pass onto the next player. So you can't just spam a few actions in a row and benefit straight off your previous actions. So you've got to bear that in mind as well, and bearing in mind what your opponents have in their immediate hand. So yeah, in terms of the mechanisms, extremely clean, but have hidden layers of weighting there. And again, a lot of the flavour, a lot of the interest and the juiciness comes from the cards and how they interact with each other. And to be honest, first off playing that isn't going to be as apparent as you might think. The game does start off with quite a churning pace as you start off by placing a few basic these farmers down, taking a resource, maybe getting a slightly better one, taking a couple of resources. And you think, oh well, this is a bit slow. It's a bit, as I said, a bit churning, a bit of a slog. But you'll soon realise that you can get some combinations and start to build things a lot quicker as you accumulate more and more of these cards and get a little bit of an engine going in order to get things rolling. So that is quite interesting and like I keep saying, something you have to quite experience yourself. The balance is really nice in terms of how the cards work with each other. None of these cards, at least not until the very end, are extremely points heavy, so you do have to play them quite cleverly in order to do well at this game. It's not a game where you are just going to get lucky with the cards you draw and just get lucky with the cards you have together and just get a bunch of points without really doing much. You do have to play well in order to do well at this game. Now, something I will say in terms of the balance, something that caught me off guard and probably will do for your first game, is that a lot of the cards, especially at the end here, these cards when they get into the hundreds, can be quite swingy in terms of leaving an opportunity on the board and just taking it, cashing it in, and then getting a bunch of points by doing next to nothing. But with repeated plays, you can foresee that coming and maybe build towards that. Additionally, there's some cards that you just won't realise are going to be in there until you've played it a few times, such as getting points for each of these towns near the river and stuff like that. So you can really build on your existing knowledge of the game in order to do well going forward. So I do like the fact that it does reward repeated plays, and it's one of those games that you can definitely get better at, which is either going to you're either going to enjoy that or you're not. Now, I will say that I know a lot of people are in two minds about games like that, because if you taught this game to someone who hasn't played it before and you're playing it with people who have, then I do think they're going to be at a distinct disadvantage. So bear that in mind. If it's a game you want to invest in with a particular player, it might be more rewarding that way. In terms of the time investment, the game does say it takes 2 hours, and that is absolutely spot on. It will pretty much always take 2 hours because every game you're going to play through the whole deck of cards. So, and of course you're only taking one of those snap actions. So no matter how many people are playing, depending on who's particularly AP prone, it's always going to play out in about 2 hours because, as I said, the game is dictated by the cards and not actually by the players. So that's quite nice, quite predictable time length, but I will say that is slightly on the upper end of my comfort level. I would be a little bit happier if the game sat at about 90 minutes. And I will say you can maybe go against the rules here and maybe shed a few cards randomly from the deck in order to get that time down. It might throw the balancing off a little bit, but I think it might be worth it if you want to, if you do want to get that time stamped down. And just be willing to take that little sacrifice and maybe a little bit more swinginess in terms of not having the cards in that deck, at least for certain. So, bear that in mind. If you are put off by that time limit, you can shed cards from the deck. But as I said, maybe throw the balance off just a little. Uptime is really good. I mean, I said those three actions are simple. Yes, there is some thought in terms of what cards you're going to play in. There is some scope for analysis paralysis. Because, as I said, the order you play things is extremely important, and you don't want to mess up. Because weighing in your cash flow and knowing how much money to keep in order to buy all the cards back when it comes to an admin phase is so important. So, yeah, a small mistake can throw you off balance a bit. So you do want to think about your moves quite carefully. Replayability. A bit like what I said earlier, it really does come from the order of the cards, and you'll be surprised about how much that does change the game. Yes, you're going to be seeing the same cards every time, but it really will fundamentally change the way you do things. And again, the lucrativeness of the cards that you want to grab up is going to change from game to game, because there could be something really powerful here in these lower slots. And depending on the numbers of the cards here, you could say have 3 low numbers and then all the rest are high numbers, meaning that one in the highest market spot can be way ahead of its time and quite powerful for what it is. So that's really going to change the feeling of the game and make things scarce and create a tension of grabbing things quicker than your opponents do, and that will really affect the flow of the game. The interaction, as I said, a lot of it is leaving opportunities for your opponents. Of course, grabbing these cards before your opponents do. Bearing in mind what opportunities you're going to leave to your opponents, because when you buy a card, some card could slide down into the current market, which you don't want your opponents to have. Again, leaving your opponents opportunities in terms of open spots on the board can shoot you in the foot if you do not bear it in mind. And be wary about what resources your opponents have in their pool and what cards they have at hand to play. Aesthetically, I will say I really was put off by the look of this game. Not so much with all the pieces on it, because you've got all these kind of traditional wooden pieces that I do think are really nice. The board itself is quite primitive looking, very basic, these kind of almost like development level artwork. It didn't do anything for me. Now I will say in person I don't dislike it as much as I did in the photograph, etc. It really was a huge obstacle for me from picking this game up, because I do not like this almost 18xx style artwork. Now I understand what they're going for with this ancient look and so on, and as I said, when I played it, I do feel like it is quite a good fit for the game. It almost has a timeless feel to it. While it is not quite my tastes, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. It does look a lot better in person. The cards look okay. The symbology is pretty decent. The reds are what's going to be the resources you pay, and the green's going to be the benefit. So that's pretty good. I mean, yeah, overall, I'm not unhappy with the way it looks, but at the same time, I'm not happy. And certainly initially, I was hugely put off by the way it looks, and I think that could strongly work as a detriment against this game, because I think if someone looks at this board, they're not going to have that urge to jump in and play it. Components, really good quality. Cards are really good quality. All these wooden pieces look great. Again, maybe not terribly thematic, but that's almost part of the appeal. All the wooden pieces look good, and they're all individual. You've got all the roads and the bridges and the settlements, even these little temples which are your little houses, and your bridges as you build across the river there. So yeah, I don't dislike the way it looks now, but the components themselves are pretty damn good, to be honest. Theme is very dry, extremely dry. In fact, probably one of the driest games I've played in a while. Not a thematic game, but that sense of progression in terms of building this little civilization. Starting from the settlement, building the towns, building the roads, building these little workhouses and the little houses attached to them. It does have a nice sense of that civilization building, and it does feel like you've achieved something throughout the game as you are clearing out the alligators and developing the land. That almost ties into the progression as well. As I said, that forward progression in terms of developing the land is good. The cards are always going to flow through lowest to highest, which again naturally ramps things up. So yeah, it has a nice ticking along effect, and it does. Certainly doesn't feel like you are doing the same thing time and time again. You do get more powerful as the game goes on, being able to reap rewards quicker and build things quicker and quicker. The scalability is excellent, pretty much alluding to that fact that the deck is going to be the deck no matter what. Slight tweaks in terms of the end game criteria or the end game kind of setup, but you're playing through all the cards, so no matter how many people you're playing with, it's always going to be at about 2 hours. Comparison-wise, I think if you're familiar with Concordia, you are going to like this card system quite a lot. For me, that's probably one of my favourite things about Concordia, being rewarded by paying through all your cards, and when you pick them up, getting rewards and so on, currency, depending on how efficiently you've played. And this game certainly does that, and on top of that, it's probably more restrictive than Concordia, because you only get to pick the top 3 up, and then you do have to dig into your pockets quite deeply in order to get quite a few cards back. So I love that system, and it is very, very similar to the Concordia system. And again, with this card drafting system, very similar to Friedmann Friese's most famous game, Power Grid. So you've got a couple of elements there from two very critically acclaimed games, and they do come together really nicely. So yeah, overall, I will say this certainly has a unique feel to it. It has a unique vibe. While being somewhat familiar with the card playing, it's the way that you get points and the way you start playing the game is certainly a different turn of pace to a lot of Euro games that I played in quite some time. You know, normally these games coming out now or climbing different tracks and getting synergies and things. This one has a real kind of throwback feel to it, which I must admit has grown on me quite a bit. I wasn't quite sure what to expect at first because, as I said, when you start, it does feel quite churning. It doesn't feel like you're achieving much. But sooner or later, the game does start to unravel, and you start to see all the clever merges of things you can do. And that left me quite impressed. And I will say, not often do I leave a game thinking about what I could have done differently, or just maybe marveling about what the game did. And this one has done that, and that's not something that I do very often. There's a lot of rinse and repeat nowadays, maybe slight tweaks on existing games. Whereas this one, I think, has really done a good job of separating itself from the pack, not only by the way it looks, by giving that throwback appeal, but these real timeless, clean mechanisms with some real unique gameplay. So yes, I think it's going to be one of those games that's going to repeat rewarded gameplays, and particularly repeat gameplays with the same people. Because again, you can get a real leg up on someone who hasn't played this game before, and you are particularly experienced. But I don't think that works against the game. If anything, it's one of those games that is going to work in favour for. I can see this one being a bit of a cult classic for quite some time. And it certainly is a game you're going to have to play for yourself to appreciate it. But if you like those throwback games with just a couple of clean but clever mechanisms, then definitely try out Faiyum. I'm certainly looking forward to try this one again, particularly again, the more I think about it, the more I appreciate what this game has done. So that is Faiyum by Friedmann Friese. Certainly gets my seal of quality, and I think this could be a slow burner for me, and I could learn to appreciate this one more and more as I play it more often. So I hope you've enjoyed the review. Please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos if you have. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.